Okay, well, it looks like that's mostly everyone at 25. I know it's not 3 minutes, but they can join later. So this is Python 101. Today we are going to be covering the fundamentals of Python. This is a extremely beginner workshop. So if you are brand new to coding, or you're brand new to Python in general, this is the perfect workshop for you. Even if you're very experienced at this language, hopefully and participate and maybe answer some of the questions in the chat. So let's move on let's move through. So in this workshop, we are going to cover why Python is a very good beginner programming language, and in my opinion, the best. Next, we're going to compare Python to other languages and find out what makes it special. We're going to have a small tutorial using Google Colab on variables. Then we're going to do general tips to become a pro coder. There's things like IDEs, GitHub, and other things to move forward in your programming journey. And then we're going to do a Q&A, please. The reason why I say please is, at least in my experience and at the last workshop I held on this topic, the Q&A was definitely the best opportunity for you guys to learn things about Python that I don't cover in this presentation. The idea behind this presentation is that we're going to cover the bare minimum of Python to give you guys a foundation to move forward. Actual Q&A, I'll move forward on some of your individual topics if you're interested in using Python for web development, web scraping, server-side things, and other fun technologies like that. So let's get right into what separates Python from other languages. If we move on to Python, we can see that Python has a couple of core principles. The main idea is that Python is made to look very simple, and this means that Python code is one of the most recognizable forms of code, as to where if you look at the code, you'll pretty much be able to see what it does without even running it. And this is really important to the rapid development cycle, which means how fast you're able to develop something in Python and how easy it is to get started with the language. So as we can see, basic Python functions that would be kind of hard in other languages are some terms: sum, print, input. And it's pretty clear just to someone that has never even seen Python before what these things do. In addition, Python uses white space, which is the idea that instead of having curly brackets and additional forms of syntax, that all you need to do to start a new line is press enter, and then it's within something else, you use a tab. This also means that you have simple terms like I showed above, and that's also what's a high-level language. In computer science, there's a wide spectrum of different languages. You might have heard a wide variety of languages or even have experience with some of them, such as if you've ever done programming in Scratch or Java or even Python, JavaScript. All those languages fit along the spectrum of levels of languages. What we see is that low-level languages like assembly or ones and zeros are very hard to pick up for the beginner because doing things effectively. Whereas in Python, things are very clear to someone that's brand new to the language, and it's easy to start picking it up, and it looks a lot like English, which means that it's a lot easier to get started. And all of these things enable that beginners are able to quickly learn programming concepts and developing projects. What you'll find starting out with Python is that you'll be able to quickly make projects that someone else would actually use, and you're able to pick up concepts that you'd later in your computer science career. For example, all the things that I've learned in Python in my short time with the language, I'm able to immediately apply to other languages like JavaScript and Java, which is one of the best things about Python. Now let's look at some of these other languages and figure out why Python is such a good starting language. So Hello World is kind of like the de facto starter for any person that's getting used to a language. All Hello World is printing out Hello World to the computer so you're able to see it. If we compare this in Python, where we have just print Hello World, it's very simple, very easy, and it follows the principles that I talked about before. Whereas we look at something like Hello World in Java, we have a lot more going on. You need to define a class, you need to define a method, and then you use something kind of complicated, system.out.println, and then you put it in the parentheses and then quotation semicolon. There's a lot more going on to do a very simple thing where you have in Python, where all you need to do is do print, quotation marks, and parentheses. Now, if we look at an even lower level language, so Python, as I mentioned before, is kind of a high level language. If we have a very low level language like assembly, which is used for really small devices or kind of like really basic computer devices, this is something that's I don't even know what's going on here. This makes no sense. And to someone that's brand new to programming, this is definitely not where you want to start out. And this is why Python is so good for a beginner to pick up. Now, if we look at another part of Python, we have getting the user to input their name to the computer, and then we're able to use that name later on. So for example, we could say, what's your name? And then they'd enter your name, and then it would say, hello, name, right? So it's something that if we compare in Python, right, it's very simple to do. All you need to do is define the variable, which we'll cover later, as the name. And then you use one of Python's built-in functions, input, and then you say the message, the prompt, enter your name. This is very simple to do in Python. Whereas we compare this with the lower level language, like Java, we see that once again, there's a lot more going on. You need to import a method to do a simple task. You need to be familiar with how objects and classes work. You need to set up a string to get the username, and you need to later output the user input. Now, I don't want to knock on Java and say that it's a bad language, because I definitely like it a lot. But as you can see, it's a lot easier to do basic tasks in Python than almost any other language. Okay, so the next thing I have planned for us is to do a Google Collab. And basically what a Google Collab is kind of it's similar to Jupyter Notebooks, which is another thing. Basically, it's a Google Drive thing that allows me to put code on the screen, and then you're able to actually run it within your web browser. So what's cool about this is that you guys will actually be able to start coding now, and I will be able to guide you through it. So if everyone could go to this link that I have posted here, I will try to put it in chat. If I can figure out that it's hidden. Ah. So there's the link in chat. And then this will open up this Google Colab, which I will share my screen to now. So hold on, I will shift from our PowerPoint to this. Can everyone see that link in the chat? Have some messages coming in. Yes, perfect. Sounds good. And then is everyone able to see this new screen that I have pulled up, the Google Colab? Welcome to Python 101. Yes, okay, we're off to a good start then. Everything is working correctly. Cool. Okay, so this is the Google Colab. Hopefully all of you are able to navigate to this. And then what you're going to do when you reach Google Colab is you need to create a copy. So how you are going to do that is press File, and then save a copy in Drive. You can also save it to your computer by downloading it here, but the main idea is that you save a copy of it. What this will allow you to do is make actual edits to it and then have those saved. Right now, if you make an edit to it, you won't be able to save it. And then also, if you make a copy of it and save it to your Drive, you'll be able to have it as reference later on. And I have some fun links there at the bottom that you are able to use later on. So is everyone able to access the Google Colab? Please let me know if you have any trouble doing that. And remember to make a copy, go to File, and then save a copy in Drive. Uh-oh. Okay, perfect. It sounds like everyone is good to go, and we can move on. So basically, this is just a short Google Colab, and we're going to go over some basic topics such as variables, math, functions, user input, and then comparisons, and then combining these into a sample project. And I'll give you some other sample projects. So the idea behind this is that, honestly, I won't be able to teach you all of Python, and that's definitely not the goal of this presentation, especially when there's a ton of tutorials out there online that can do it much better than I can, being able to teach you all of Python. So the idea behind here is that you're able to do some coding yourself, and I can give a short introduction to some of the basic functions that you do in Python and other computer science language. So the first thing we need to start out with variables. And the idea of variables can be thought of boxes, in where you put something in a box and then it's able to stay in there and then you can take it out later on. And variables are one of the most important concepts within computer science, because no matter what language you use, no matter what you're doing, you always have to be using variables. Now, in Python, there's different types of variables that are able to store different types of information. So in computer science and almost all languages, there's different types of information. We have strings, which can be thought of just like a name or some text or a group of characters. And this is what you want to do if you're storing text or stuff that's contained in an alphabet, like sample string. An integer is something, basically a number that doesn't have a decimal. So it's a whole number. So this would be number of people, 3. And an integer is good when you know that you won't be able to do any dividing that would result in a decimal. And it's just a simple thing that you can use to do most of your operations within computer science. A float is a different number in that you're able to do things with decimals. So for example, if you were dividing 3 divided by 2 to get 1.5, you need to have a float so it's able to store that data. If not, what would end up happening is it would round down to 1, because that would be the next integer and it would always round down. And this is pretty much the different types of variables that you'll use. It's not too important that you know exactly what all of these things are yet, because it'll come up as you start doing some programming yourself. But it's important to understand the concept of variables, which, similar to math, you use it to store something and you're able to reference it later on. And you can even edit it and reference that new value later on. And then also another special kind of data type that Python has that combines these variables, which is referred to as a list. For example, if we had a list of cool people, and then I guess we also have some numbers at the end for no reason, we have you, you're a very cool person, me, I'm an incredibly cool person, and Bill Watterson, which is an even cooler person than all of us combined. Now we can store all of these different things in a list. And what this means is that we have multiple different data types, which is exclusive to Python, but we won't get that too soon. But basically what we can do is we can store multiple different data types. So here's our string. Here's another string, even though it uses these different quotations, so the same thing. Another string with a space in it, which is an important thing to realize. In Python, you can have spaces like that. Then we have an integer, which is a number, and then a float, a number with a decimal. And then what we can do, if we want to see all these things, we can print them all out. We'll talk about printing later on. Now, if we go on to more on variables, we can look at how variables are actually used. So in this example, we assign 3 to x. So now x has the value of 3. Later on, if we print the value of x, which pretty much just puts it out to the computer, we'll get 3. Then we use this exact same variable x again, and we assign 5 to it. Then when we print it out again, it'll be 5. So if we run this, we'll get 3 and 5, which makes sense. Hopefully, hopefully we're not going too advanced yet. We're just moving on to the simple variables. Another cool thing about Python is that we can change the type of the data type that we have within the variable. A data type is something like a list, a string, an integer, or a float, the things that we talked about earlier. There's also some other ones, but we'll move on to that later. Oh, did I cover Booleans? Oh, no, I didn't. So another data type is a Boolean, which is exclusively represented by true and false. You can kind of think of this, at least in the computer science world, as 1 and 0. So the only 2 values that a Boolean can have, or a bool, is true and false, nothing else. And this makes it really good for, you could save the value of a Boolean to only execute a program if it's equal to true, and keeping basically an on-off switch within your program. Sorry that I didn't cover that earlier. And then what we see here is that we change the value of x from a string or regular text to a number. And then when we run print each time, we'll print out hello at the beginning. And then once this x changes to 5, we'll print 5. So hopefully everyone's squared away with variables and we don't have any questions there. The next thing we need to move on to is math. And although I don't know, hopefully some of you guys like math. Personally, I don't love math, but it's necessary to do within computer science. And mathing computers and programming is very similar to the math you do regularly. So we have addition, which is just 9 plus 10. That's pretty simple. This is represented by the plus symbol. We have subtraction represented by the little dash on your computer, the minus thing. And then this function is just like it would normally. There's nothing special going on yet. We have multiplication, and this can also be done with like 6.5 if you want to get a float as your value or whatnot. But this all works as expected. It gets a little more tricky once we move into division, which is represented by the slash on your computer. We have 20 divided by 4, we get 5. That makes a lot of sense. But then when we move on to something a little more complicated, like 21 divided by 4, we get a float. And this is special because floats in computer science are dealt with a lot differently than other integers. So as we can see here, addition, subtraction, multiplication, we all got integers here. We all got whole numbers, but as soon as we move on to division, we start getting floats, which is we have to deal with those in a separate way. And we need to do something called typecasting, but that's a little more advanced. Maybe that'll be in Python 201. We can also have exponents. This is represented as 6 to the power of 2, so 36, 4 to the power of 2, 16. And then we also can do decimals as our exponents. If you're good with math, this is the same as a square root. You might be familiar with that. And then you're going to get 3. So exponents are just the multiplication, but you're going to put that exact same symbol twice. And then we also have a new form of math, which is really important, called modulus. This is definitely something that if you're not familiar with computer science, you probably haven't heard of yet, but it's very simple to the idea of remainders in division. So for example, if we have 10 modulus 3, what this kind of means and how you can sort of think about it is having 10 divided by 3, but then we're trying to define the remainder of that. So if we have the remainder of 10 divided by 3, the remainder that we get is going to be 1. And then if we have 27 divided by 5, the remainder of that is going to be 2. Although this might not make a bunch of sense now, and you might not be able to see the applicable use case for modulus within programming, it's really important when we look at things like checking if a number is even or odd. Is one of the most basic uses of modulus, because if you have modulus 2 of anything, x modulus 2, if that's equal to 0, we know we have an even number. And then if it's anything else, it would be an odd number. And then also we need to look into PEMDAS in Python. A cool thing about Python and almost all programming languages is that they still follow the PEMDAS, GEMDAS, whatever they're calling it now. But basically the idea that you have the grouping, multiplication, division, and then addition, subtraction within the language without having to do anything special. So for example, if we have 5 plus 5 times 4, instead of doing 10 times 4, it's going to do 5 times 4 plus 5 to get 25. And the reason why we had to print everything out is so it's able to show up on the computer, and especially since we have these multiple different things. Okay, now we need to go into something a little more advanced, which is functions, especially the built-in functions within Python. So we've already seen one of the most important functions within the language, which is known as print. And print, what it allows you to do is just display a number on a computer, display the number on the screen, or have it come down here. That'll be your output. The idea behind functions within a programming language is that it allows you to do things that you normally do a bunch of different times. It would really suck as a coder is that every single time you wanted to print a number, you'd have to code your own way just to be able to do that. So what functions, and especially the built-in ones within Python, is allow you to get access to common things that you would use multiple times. So function calls, as you might have seen already, are typically in the form of the name of the function, in this case print, and then also some brackets or parentheses. So it'll look like this. There's also a lot of other functions in Python, like sum. There's some ones that have to do with strings, which I'll get onto later. That'll be another 201, Python 201 thing. But the idea is here is that you're able to use these to easily do tasks that would be really hard to do normally. So as we can see, here we use print on multiple lines of text. So we have a string that we'd like to print out, which is just regular text, and we'd like to print it out to the screen. We can do that multiple times easily with the print function. It's also important to note that if we have print but nothing in it, that'll just print a blank line. This is kind of unique to print because a lot of functions, if you have nothing in them, they'll give you an error, but that's one of the things that will work within print. So I hope, hopefully everyone is still caught up. If anyone has any questions right now, please let me know. I can take some questions right now. If we have any questions, oh, it looks like we have one in Q&A. Let me try and figure this out. Can we share previous program we did? If you'd like to share previous program that you did, I'd highly recommend going to the Discord server and then going to show your work. It's one of the channels in there, and you can show all the previous projects that you have worked on and do that there. Do we have any other questions about what I've gone over so far, or can we move on to stuff that's a little bit more complicated, but definitely builds on what we've had already? Okay, sounds good. Looks like you guys are following along very well. Good job. Let's move on to user input. So user input is really valuable for when we want the user to determine what the program is going to do. For example, if we want to get the name from the user, we can have them do that with the use of this input function. Input is very similar to print, where it follows the exact same kind of syntax, where you have the name of the function and then the parentheses. So how this works is you have your name, this is a variable that will end up representing a string, and you have input, the name of the function, and then you have a prompt, which basically tells the user what you want them to do and gives them a little space to input it. We can also do something else where we have color, which uses input as well and saves their favorite color. And then what we can do is we can print all these out using a print statement and some string concatenation or whatever it's called. I don't know how to say it, but that's okay. Now, if we look what happens when we run this code, we're going to get name equals input. We're going to get an error because I did not check this presentation and this part of it. So we're going to fix that real quick using my pro programming skills. Boom. We're going to try running it again and hope that it works. It's going to say, please enter your name. So we're going to say Andrew Schmidt. Please enter your favorite color. I'm going to say blue. I mean coral, because that's the color of code day. And then it's going to say, basically, hello, Andrew Schmitz. My favorite color is coral too. So that's a basic example of how to do simple input and output within Python. And this is really good for some of your starter projects, getting used to having the user input something and then being able to do operations with that or print it out. So in this print statement here, you might have noticed that we did something different. The idea behind it is that we combined multiple strings and our variables with this plus symbol. What this allows you to do is put multiple things in one print statement, multiple variables, different types of variables, and all kinds of things like that. So as a quick example, say we want to get the user's age. So we need to do age equals input. And let's say, please enter your age. That's pretty simple, right? And we'd like to print out their age as well. So let's say print. We're going to put our parentheses, so we're allowed to do that. You are, I'm going to leave a little space. We're going to put a plus symbol since we'd like to add something else. And then we're going to use our age variable lower on. We're going to add another plus so we can say something else. Put our parentheses, and then we're going to say years old. Just like that. Perfect. So now when we run this, it'll ask me for my name, Andrew. We'll say blue this time, and then age, we can put 17, and boom, it'll say you are 17 years old. Very simple and very effective. And as you can see in this example, we used age not to store a string like these other ones or text, but instead we used it to save an integer, and then we later printed it out using this age variable. Okay, let's move on again. This is additionally using commas, but I don't think you can do that anymore, so I don't know why that's still there. Very bad. And then we can move on to a little more complex example of using the string concatenation and basically combining different parts into one string. We can combine hello and world and use our addition that we used earlier. However, this addition works a little different because now instead of adding two numbers, we're adding two things of text. And this is really important later on to combining different things. We have a little bit of typecasting, but that's a little more advanced for this talk. So let's move on to comparisons. Comparisons are really cool because they allow us to determine if something is equal to each other, if it's the same as something, and this will come up a bunch in your programming and ties really well into if and else statements. And all if and else statements allow you to do, its Boolean logic is to determine if this is true, we will do this. So if n1 equals n2, this we can see we have two equals because we're comparing things. Normally, if we're just assigning a variable to something, we only have one. Then it will say the numbers are equal. If else or else here will print not equal. So if this doesn't happen, we can do this. So what happens here is that obviously these two numbers aren't the same. Then it won't print that these numbers are equal. Instead, it will come down here and it will say not equal. And then we have another example of doing Boolean logic, right? So we have, this is another example of a comparisons. We have is 3 less than 4, and obviously that's true, so we're going to get true. And then is 10 greater than or equal to n1 plus 3. So if we go up to n1, we see that n1 is 7. We can use it multiple times throughout the program. Comes down here, we add it 7 plus 3, 10. And then since it's greater than or equal to, then obviously that's true. So these expressions and the ones that return true and false are known as Booleans, and they're really important in programming and need to be used with this if-else logic. That's another thing that you'll quickly start using within your programming, if, else, elif, and things like that. And then this is true and false, which as we saw, if we go back to the top, that would be a Boolean. Okay, are there any questions about what I've gone over so far? I know I kind of skipped over some more advanced topics or some topics that we weren't going to cover here. So please let me know if you have any additional questions. It looks like we have one thing in chat. I'm not on computer. Perfect. Perfect. It looks like we are good to go. Does anyone have any additional questions? Please ask in Q&A or chat before we move on. We have a question. Here we go. Boolean is used as equal equals. Okay, let me explain this. So a Boolean, right, is just a variable. So we can say Boolean is true. No, that doesn't make any sense. We'll say, is it raining? And at least for me out here in sunny San Diego, it's not raining. So we can actually set this equal to false. Is it hot? It's kind of hot. So we're going to say true. So this is an example of a Boolean. It's just simple true or false. But the two, the equals equals, it's what's used to compare two variables and then tie into this Boolean logic structure, the if else. So basically what this if equals equals is saying is that are two things equal to each other. So if we have 7 equals 7, that's going to be true. And then when we evaluate it with this if statement, basically what an if statement is that if something is true, it's going to do it. So then it will say these numbers are equal, or in this case, it will return true. So for example, if we set this as both to 7, we're going to get, that's not right. We're going to get the numbers are equal. So this here is just a comparison. The equals equals, that's what's referred to as a comparison, and that's used with Booleans, and it will allow you to determine whether or not something is true. But then the idea of a Boolean itself, that's just a variable similar to these ones up here, but you can only say true or false. I hope that answers your question. Do we have any other questions before we move on to kind of combining these various topics? Okay, good. It sounds like everyone is keeping up. So let's move on to kind of, this is an example project that I made a couple of years ago. This was a bank heist program that we made. And basically it allows the user to do something like a choose your own adventure using these concepts that we've learned. So we have functions. That's a little bit more complicated. And if it looks a little different, that's because we're on Python 2.7, which is a different version. We have our print statements that print the text. We have our evaluators, right? If the answer is equal to Q, this is an example of one of those comparisons. We have input. This is Python 2.7, so it's raw input, but in Python 3, it's input, and then it allows you to do a logic structure, and it allows you to play this entire game pretty much just using some basic functions, print statements, and variables. So although this project might not make a lot of sense because it's in Python 2.7, and this isn't the full code, what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that knowing basic topics, you're able to do a lot in Python. And that's what I'd really like to stress within this presentation is how easy it is to get started with Python and actually start making projects that are interesting and kind of cool. So in other languages, as Java that I demonstrated earlier, it would take a lot to get to this point where you're able to compare multiple things or do something like that. But in Python, you're able to quickly start making projects that you're able to use. Do we write all this down on our copy? You do not need to write anything down that I typed in here. That's okay on your own copy. You can edit it yourself and you can play around with it a little to kind of see what I'm talking about, to try some things of your own, but you don't have to write it all down on your own copy. I hope that that kind of shows you how easy it is to start working on some of your projects of your own. In terms of great starter projects, this is definitely one of the topics that get asked the most. What kind of projects can I start doing in Python after just knowing a couple basic things? You can start playing around with the random module and start working with a dice roller that just rolls dice for a user, cards and number guessing. To practice the functions, if else, and user input, you can use a choose your own adventure thing like I did up here, or Mad Libs. That's a really good example of something that you can do. You can do drawing with Python Turtle. This will teach you a lot about even classes. You can learn about the functions and math within Python Turtle. And then here's a link to a bunch of different projects you can use. And then in terms of classes and books, there's a lot of various books that allow you to go over Python, and it'll give you a more in-depth tutorial and provide some exercise for you to get started with this. A big one is CodeCademy, Udemy, Free Codecamp, and free Python books. And I left a link to a big Udemy course that's pretty popular called Automate This Boring Stuff with Python. And the cool thing about this Learn Programming subreddit and the link that you'll find here is that they give a lot of these courses out for free. I think the one here is going to be expired, but you can find a lot of good courses online for free and start learning some of the more advanced concepts. And I guarantee you, they'll go over to things that are very similar to what we learned about. So hopefully that gave you a brief introduction into Python. We're now going to move back to the PowerPoint, and I'm going to talk about how you can get started with Python and making your own projects after picking up some of these basic skills. So let me stop this share. And I will move back to our PowerPoint. Right there, we're right back to where we left off. Okay, so after covering some of the basic things you can do in Python, I'd like to teach you guys how kind of I moved forward with Python. I started out in a very similar situation to where you are now. I knew absolutely nothing about programming. I went to my very first code day about 2 years ago in San Diego. I had a blast, and that's kind of how I got involved. And then I started getting involved with virtual code days about a year ago, and starting to pick up my Python skills there. And then here I am now. So I'd like to talk about some of the best places that you can learn how to learn and get some courses under your belt, how to start working on projects with things called IDEs and GitHub, and where to move after you've gotten a little more familiar with Python and you're looking to move forward. So in terms of learning Python, here's an example of a couple of courses. I've kind of compiled a list of a couple of courses that you could use to start learning Python. One of these things, this is a lot websites. It's a lot more popular with web development, but it's called W3 Schools. Although this isn't the biggest tutorial website out there, it serves as a great reference for individual things. So one of the most important parts about getting started with programming and really developing your skills is knowing how to use Google and look things up. You'll probably hear this a bunch when you're getting started with programming, but the ability to look things up and use the wonderful internet to figure out how to do things is one of the most important parts of programming. The good thing about W3 Schools is that it has some semblance of progression, so it kind of feels like a course, even though it's not really. It's free, and you're able to start working through the course, and some of these concepts are free. There is like a certificate thing that you can pay for, but it's very expensive, and I definitely wouldn't recommend, especially if you're in high school, middle school, or starting out in college, to start buying certificates, because they will likely become irrelevant as you move forward. And then the other problem with W3 Schools is it's not terribly in-depth. So it will definitely teach you some of the basics of the language, but not really how to piece them together into big projects. If someone raised their hands as a participant, how do we do that? Let's figure that out. Attendees, raise your hands, allow to talk. So would you like to say something? Or would you like to, do you have a question about something in chat? I guess not, so we will continue.
Yeah.
Yes. Hello.
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you very much. We're just trying to get in, and we're finding it a little bit challenging to get in.
Yeah.
So,
did you have a question, or were you just trying to get into the presentation?
You're just creating the presentation. I'm all right. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'm glad that you're able to get in. Okay, let's plow ahead into another online resource that you can use to learn Python. This is a very popular one, and it's actually the one that I used, called CodeCademy. I really like CodeCademy because it has really good lessons for getting you started. It encourages you to do a lot of projects. It has a very good system of allowing you to do individual projects and move forward. It has really good documentation on how to do each thing, and it has a good community. The problem about this is, as I would like to phrase it, it's turbo expensive. What this means is that just to do a very basic course, well, you're able to do any course and very complex courses, but it's $240 after your little trial. And this is kind of a big problem for people that are getting started, especially if you're not guaranteedly sure whether or not you want to get involved within programming and exactly what service you want to do. Honestly, it doesn't make sense to pay $240. How I used CodeCademy is there was a little COVID scholarship that they basically gave everyone the program free for 3 months. So I would definitely look out for one of those. But if you'd like to start out, maybe test out their trial, there's also some free courses. There's a little outdated, but you can also use those. But CodeCademy is a really great resource for learning Python. I also used it to learn some HTML because those were another free course that they offered. But in terms of courses, this is kind of the gold standard, but it costs a bunch, as you can see here. This is an example of kind of what CodeCademy looks like, and a lot of these good courses will look like. You have the instructions on your side, you have your code that you're actually working on, and then the output. So you're able to do everything in the browser. It allows you to learn the individual skills that you need. It provides instructions on exactly how to do each thing, and then allows you to run your solution within the browser and kind of test it out right there. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of people really like CodeCademy. But as I said before, It's really expensive, but if you can find a scholarship from CodeCademy, it's a really great resource. Let's continue. This is another one. It's very different from CodeCademy, and obviously it's called Free Code Camp, which is nice because it's free. This is definitely one of the main draws of this program. What's nice about them is that they have tons of videos on different languages and the programming language itself. These videos are very in-depth and they're all taught by professionals within the field. The only problem with this is that if we compare this to something like CodeCademy, is that it's not very interactive. You don't actually get to write any of the code yourself like you do here, but instead, at least what I've seen so far through this website, is that instead what you do is you watch a video and then it tests you on the skills that you've learned within the video, kind of with some code, and then allows you to answer a question, whether or not you're able to do that. Is this correct spelling to CodeCademy? I think it's spelled, at least in their website, CodeCademy. That's how it's spelled, like that's their brand, as you can see right here, CodeCademy. But a lot of people referred to it as CodeCademy as well, because that's one that's kind of trying to do that. Cool. So yes, free code camp is definitely good, and it tests you and it provides you with the videos, and it's very free, but it's not as interactive as some of these other courses, and you definitely need to supplement it from some of your coding yourself. And then another great resource is Udemy, or similar service to that, where you're able to do take a bunch of courses. I think Skillshare is really big in this market. I know there's one other one, but I don't really remember what it is, but there's Udemy. And then r/learnpython, I have that listed because a lot of times what they'll do is that they will post free courses for Udemy courses. So what I've been able to do is you kind of wait around in the Learn Python subreddit or the Learn Programming subreddit, and then eventually about once a month, they will drop a bunch of codes for free courses, and you're able to redeem that for these free courses, because on its own, these courses can be very expensive, but you can easily get them for free. I think I've racked up about 10 courses just for free from waiting around in these subreddits and getting the codes. There's also a great wiki within r/learnpython. I'll add that to the Google Collab, so you can link there. And then of course, a great resource also is the Code Day people. You can ask any of them and we would be happy to link you to appropriate learning resources and help you out with some of your projects. Let's move on to projects, like I just said. So projects are one of the most essential parts to getting involved within programming. The idea behind projects is they really allow you to implement what you've learned from these kind of classes and really apply them to your own projects that hopefully you're able to use and you can share with others. And you learn the most amount of things by doing these projects. So a big problem that we have, and something deemed as tutorial hell, is where you do a bunch of these tutorials and you learn all these tutorials and you take all the classes in the world, but then when it gets to doing some actual coding and something where you're not guided step by step, it becomes a lot harder, and it becomes a lot harder fast. So projects are really good for basically applying what you've learned, figuring out all aspects of the development cycle where you're having to deal with importing modules and writing code and working with others within these projects. And also it's really good for getting small projects under your belt. So what I definitely recommend is for all of you starting out and getting involved within programming in general, is you should start out with a bunch of very small projects. I'm going to be honest, you won't be able to do the most ambitious project from day one. You won't be able to create YouTube or hack Facebook or do any of those fun things on day one. But what you should be doing is get involved in a bunch of little projects. So you're able to get a lot of them under your belt. You're able to feel the kind of the experience of starting a project and finishing it, and you're able to work through it. So this is one of the most important things that I would do. And all of you are already on the right step by getting involved within Code Day, where you're able to work on a project over the weekend. So all of you here are definitely on the right track, but definitely continue to do projects as you move forward within this within these tutorials and courses. Next, let's move on to IDEs. Before that, I have one question here. How do we get the Collab thing? There was a link in the chat and in the presentation. I will put the link down there again, or if someone else could put the link there, that would be perfect at the end. Perfect, we got the link. That is how you can access that and move through it, and make sure you make a copy, as I mentioned before. So let's move on to IDEs. So IDEs are very important for working on big projects and allowing you to basically work on multiple files. And they have a ton of cool things, like it'll highlight all the code to make it look pretty. It'll have some like functions that'll allow you to look things up and fun stuff like that. And these are really essential for getting started within programming, besides just downloading Python and getting started. But having an IDE is almost just as important. Although you can definitely get away with just using idle, you definitely need an IDE as you start moving forward. So there's a big debate between the multiple IDEs and which one is better, which one is worse, yada, yada, yada. But the big ones that are the big ones that everyone uses are typically Visual Studio Code, PyCharm, Atom, Sublime Text, and there's some other ones, but there's too many to count. My biggest recommendation for IDEs is don't get too hard stuck on one. Try some different ones out and see which one you like. And then also don't worry too much about it. You can definitely waste way too much time trying to configure IDE or get some silly error to work. Just in general, I'd really recommend when you're starting out with programming and you're facing a lot of these errors, is that there's definitely a time where you just need to restart and try again. So if you're having any problems with downloading the IDE, make sure you reach out for help. These IDEs can be very tricky to get running and get configured, but you definitely don't want that to be your major deterrent. The IDE that I use and I would highly recommend is called PyCharm. A big problem about PyCharm is that it can get very expensive, just like a bunch of other things within programming. That's kind of a common theme, is how much it costs to get started. Although programming is really cheap, when you're just starting out, any cost is a lot. But what you can do is you can use the GitHub student pack, and CodeDay itself actually is a program where we can link you up with the GitHub student pack. Make sure you ask one of the staff members or employees in the Discord about the GitHub student pack. And what this allows you to do is you can get PyCharm and all of the various programs used by JetBrains that they offer for absolutely free, which is really good. As long as you're a student, you're able to redeem this and use it for as long as you'd like. Okay, moving forward past IDEs, we can look at GitHub. GitHub and also the GitHub student pack is one of the most important things that allows you to share project with others, back up your projects and work on others, easily share a project with others. And also with GitHub, you can work on open source projects, which are projects that are used by many people and many developers contribute to. So getting signed up with GitHub and starting to learn those skills is incredibly important. GitHub is another thing that can be kind of tricky to configure and hard to get the hang of, but once you start working with it, it's very useful. Starting using Python. So at the very basic level, when we start using Python, basically how this works is you need to download it from the official website and then save it to your computer and then get an ID or start right away with idle. So idle is kind of the built-in IDE that comes with Python, but I wouldn't recommend using it because of all the features that IDEs offer. But to get started with Python and start making basic programs, all you need to do is go to python.org, download the file that you use for Python, save it to your computer, and you can start coding right away. I have spent 4 hours configuring random things because that's typically what ends up happening when you start getting used to these coding problems and start downloading Python. It can take you a very long time to configure it and get it to actually work on your computer. But once you get it going, it becomes very easy to start with and you won't have to worry about it again as long as you get it on your computer and you're able to update it in the future. What to do with Python in the future? So obviously, a lot of you guys are just working on the basics and we're working forward with those and learning the essential parts of Python. But what Python is used for in the field, like what kind of careers can you get from Python down the line? The big things that Python can be used for are machine learning and AI, using modules or libraries called PyTorch and TensorFlow, backend web development using Django and Flask. You can make a lot of bots, like Discord bots. All of the bots that you'll find in the CodeCademy community are all run off Python. You can also make web bots that basically scour the web and scrape it using requests and Selenium. And you can do a lot of cool things with Python pretty quickly. And these are the projects and the fields that you can kind of move into After learning the basics, starting to do your basic projects, you can start going into one of these fields. You can start going into multiple and start learning about how Python is really used in careers and in the business world. Perfect. Okay, so we reached our end. We're going to move on to questions and answers. I know I definitely covered a bunch of different things, some of it a little more in depth than others, and I'm sure you all have a bunch of questions about the various things that I covered in programming, how you can use Python in the future, and how you can move forward. So we already have one question from an anonymous attendee, right name. What about the IDE called IntelliJ? So IntelliJ is also made by, I'm going to stop sharing real quick, is made by the same company that makes PyCharm. And I use it to do Java development. So they're really good for Java development. But the IntelliJ is definitely mainly centered to Java. And then you can also get an extension that allows you to code with Python in IntelliJ. But the problem with that is that it's mainly designed for Java. So I'd recommend getting PyCharm, but you can definitely use both. And the great thing about the GitHub student pack that I mentioned earlier is that you're able to get all of them. So you can get PyCharm, you can get IntelliJ, and you can get all the products that they offer. Okay, we have a question about, can you make a website with Python? So Python is actually one of the best programming language for making the back end of websites. And what that means is there's two kind of areas of a website. You have the front end, and that controls how the website looks. So you have your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and that basically is what you see as a user on the website. But what Python is really good at with using Django and Flask is doing the backend, which is referred to kind of like the algorithms and the operations that happen after the user inputs some data. So for example, say you have a program that allows a user to input their favorite books, and then your website will return all the books that are similar to that book. So obviously you can't do all that using HTML and JavaScript on the front end. So what instead you're going to have to do is refer back to your database of books, maybe the similar books that the user has searched through before and stuff like that. And Python is really good for being able to do that in the back end using these two, the Django and Flask. Can Python be used to make mobile applications? So like your Android apps, your iOS apps, Python really isn't centered around doing mobile applications like you'd see with these other languages. Definitely Java is the main language for Android development, especially these days. Android runs off Java, and almost every single Android app uses Java. Also, you can also use Kotlin, which is created by JetBrains, the people that make PyCharm and IntelliJ actually, and that's really good for that. And then for Apple, I think you use something called Swift and Swift UI and doing things like that. Python definitely isn't the best for making mobile applications in terms because you're going to be using those main languages. I'm pretty sure you're able to make mobile web applications, which is like a website that you pull up on your phone, and you can definitely use Django and Flask, which are Python libraries there. But definitely if your main focus is these mobile applications, I would definitely recommend starting out with Java. Although it kind of showed the example of how Java is a little bit harder, it's actually probably the second easiest language to pick up when you're just getting started out, the first being Python. So that would be a great resource for you to start. But if you just want to, if you're not 100% sure that you'd like to do mobile apps, I would definitely suggest starting out with Python, kind of learning the principles of computer science like loops, functions, object-oriented programming in Python, because it's a little bit easier, and then transferring those skills to Java if your main focus is making mobile applications. Okay, do we have any other questions? And then also what you can do is raise your hand and then I will unmute you, or one of my friendly panel members will unmute and you guys can tell me your question and then we can do something like that. So please let me know. What is my favorite programming language? So I would definitely say Python would be my favorite since it's the one that I do the most with. I also do some Java stuff that I've learned from taking a Java class at school, but I definitely started out with Python and it still remains my favorite because of kind of like the things that I've talked about is that with Python, you're able to do a lot of cool projects very quickly. So compared to like C++ or one of those harder languages, you can spend the first 2 months just working on like learning Python, stuff like that, and then you won't actually get to making the projects. What are the favorite projects that you've worked on in Python? I definitely say the ones that I made in CodeCademy. So I had 2 big projects that I made with the assistance of the CodeCademy team with projects with Python. I did something with the stock market that allowed you to pull information about the stock market and present that with Python. And then also one that was kind of like a database searcher where it would allow you to put in some like, it would allow you to say you search for a celebrity or like a city, and it would allow you to pull the Wikipedia information from that. That was kind of going to be an extension project, but I never really got onto that, to finishing that. Okay, how can you make games in Python? So for making games in Python, there's a big module known as Pygame. And what this allows you to do is make basic 2D games within Python. So I definitely recommend checking out Pygame. Just look up Pygame, and it's a library that you can use within Python to make games. You can also make some basic games, such as the example that I showed earlier, kind of like a text adventure game where the entire game happens just as text. But if you want to get into graphics and using Python, I would definitely suggest checking out Pygame. Thank you for this workshop. Is it true Python language earns more than other coding languages? So in terms of careers and basically earning lots of money with Python, Python is definitely one of the highest earning computer science languages because you can do some really valuable things with it. So at a career and at a professional level, some of the major things you do with Python are data science, and you're able to analyze data, and machine learning and AI. And obviously, these are some very in-demand skills within the industry right now. So if you're able to learn Python and you're able to pick up on these things like data science, it'll be a very high-paying career, and it's definitely very lucrative in the future. How do you update games in Python? I'm not exactly sure what you mean. If you meant like taking a game that you already have and then editing it within Python, if you'd like to create like a new version of a game. So say you have a game where you like drive a car, you're able to add that in Python and do that, but I'm not really sure what you mean by updating games in Python. Okay, do we have raising your hands? Do you have a question that you'd like to say? Does anyone have something like that?
Would you be doing anything on C++ anytime later?
So C++, is another programming language pretty similar to Python. And I've heard that it's also a decent starting language. Personally, I am not familiar with any C++, but I'm sure there's someone within the CodeCademy community that knows a little bit about it, that would be happy to point you in the right direction. But personally, no, I do not know anything about C++.
Thank you.
Cool. Are there any other questions? Please let me know. I can't answer them. I'm sure my fellow panelists can. So please let me know. If we have any questions from Twitch, we also have a Twitch stream that is constantly streaming all the workshops that we do and some of the various fun events that we do at CodeCademy there. So do we have any questions from there?
I did not see any questions from Twitch.
Bummer, because I always like some high quality questions. Well, if that's all you guys have, then I think we can wrap this up. We have a lot of other fun workshops going on that will take place during CodeCademy. So if all of you are starting out and looking to get in some more learning experiences similar to this, I would definitely recommend checking all those out. I will also be offering another Python 101 presentation, which is the exact same as this one on Friday. So if you really liked it and you'd like to watch the entire exact thing again, you can come to that. If you miss some of this, that would be a perfect opportunity. We have one more bonus question. Perfect. How do you make a new version of Python then post it out for everyone to play? So if you, I'm not really exactly sure what you mean. Like if you have a Python game and you create a new version of it, basically what you'd have to do is edit the source code for the project, and then you could use something like GitHub to share your project with others. Basically what it allows you to do is you can put all your code on GitHub, and then you can send people as a link to Python to basically say like, here's all my Python code, please check it out. Something like that. My workshop for Python 101.2 is going to be on Friday, the 26th at 7:30 Pacific time. So it would be 10:30 Eastern time. That'll be the exact same thing. In terms of the other meetings, not necessarily this one, you can go to the Discord and then look at the schedule that is posted in announcements, and that will also have all the various workshops that are coming up soon. Where do you go in Python to make a game? We have another fabulous question. So I definitely recommend going to Pygame after you pick up some initial skills within Python. Pygame can be found at www.pygame.org. I'll post that link right here. Boom. You can see an example of using Pygame and the actual library there. Although the website definitely looks pretty basic, you can make a lot of cool basic 2D games within Python. And you can look up example Pygame games, example Pygame projects, and find some there. So here's an example of some Pygame projects. I will post that right here. So you can get started working on games within Python. If you'd like to make some more advanced games, ones that are like 3D, ones that involve like multiplayer, or some of those more complicated aspects of making games, I would definitely recommend checking out Unity. Unity is an open source game engine that allows you to do some of those basic game making things ridiculously easy, especially compared to how hard it was in the past. So that would definitely be a great thing to check out if you're interested in game development. Checking out Unity, or also Unreal Engine. I'm aware that that's one of the biggest game engines going on right now. Well, if that wraps it up for the questions about Python programming in general, it looks like we are good to go. That's all I have for you today. Please check out the Discord community and all our additional programs that we have going on. There's a lot of good stuff going on this weekend, and then also within the community as a whole. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and I hope I answered all your inquiries about Python and gave you all kind of like a good primer to the language. You can start moving forward on your own. Goodbye.